Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we are joined by Kayla Meek, Vice President of Resident Experience for Anthology Senior Living, to discuss caregiver burnout versus compassion fatigue. With almost a decade of experience in the senior living industry and a background in public education and gerontology, Kayla is an advocate for senior living seniors and their caregivers across the country. She leads Anthology Senior Living's network of 26 communities to develop impactful programming for residents and their loved ones. We're in the middle of National Caregiver Month in November, and Kayla will address a topic today that is top of mind for many with the upcoming holiday season. Caregivers often run out of time for themselves when faced with busy schedules and many responsibilities. We hope this webinar provides useful tips and techniques to help promote your personal wellness. Should you have any questions while listening to Kayla speak, please use the Q&A or chat functions at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer questions both in real time and at the end of the presentation. Without further ado, Kayla, I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys so much for being here today. Again, my name is Kayla Meek. I'm Vice President of Resident Experience at Anthology Senior Living. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about compassion fatigue. Just a few more tidbits of information about National Family Caregivers Month, as that is the month that we're focusing on in the month of November, is that it's a time to celebrate the contributions of caregivers, provide them with tools that they need, and to continue to advocate. And so that's a quote from the Mental Health of America Association. We recognize that caregiving in any capacity can be difficult on an individual. And so taking this month to bring more awareness and to advocate for the needs of those caregivers is really what we want to focus on today. I think it's important to note that 53 million Americans are unpaid caregivers, whether they're caregivers to family, friends, or even neighbors. And then that then has a variety of impacts upon both their physical and mental health of the caregiver themselves. So to focus a little bit about the impacts on the mental health is that caregiving can cause higher levels of depression. It can cause higher levels of stress and frustration, even feelings of emotional strain. There's increased levels of exhaustion, levels of loss of self-identity, and even lower levels of self-care. So all of those things that an individual needs to do for themselves to feel well, whether that's running your errands or exercising, cooking your own meals, going to your own health appointments, or getting your hair cut, or that ability to provide self-care. Some of the things that are affected through physical health by providing incidences of heart disease for an individual. It has proven diminished immune responses. So with a diminished immune response, that then increases one's risk for conditions like the common cold or the flu. It just makes you more susceptible because of that compromised immune system. It even has been proven to have slower wound healing, increased acid reflux, headaches, pain, and even an increased tendency to develop other serious illnesses. So as you can see, both mental and physical health concerns can be quite serious due to the impact of caregiving. And if that wasn't enough, there are even more stresses associated with the COVID climate that we're living through, and that this helps actually further isolate folks, which increases health concerns associated with caregiving through COVID-19. So some of our objectives today to discuss are, we really just want to focus on defining compassion fatigue, and then we're going to compare it to caregiver burnout. What are the differences? We'll then talk about how are they similar. Together, we're going to work through two worksheets that will then be provided to you at the end of today's presentation. So we'll talk about 10 tips for family caregivers and how to apply that to your life. We'll also send home with you a bit of homework. It's to help you identify your care compassion fatigue self-assessment. So let's start off by our basic definition of what is compassion fatigue. So compassion fatigue is identified and defined as the state that's experienced by those helping people or even animals in distress. It is this extreme state of tension and this preoccupation that's with the suffering of those that they are helping, to the degree that it could cause in the caregiver this secondary traumatic stress. So, this secondary traumatic stress disorder is now being labeled as compassion fatigue. I think we're all really probably more familiar with the term them and see some of the differences. So, caregiver burnout, we'll start with that, is that it is really more reflective of this cumulative process that's marked by emotional exhaustion and withdrawal that has been associated with increased workload and institutional stress, not necessarily trauma related. Whereas compassion fatigue is this secondary traumatization that is this result of an emotional residue or strain of the exposure to working with those suffering from consequences of their own traumatic events. So, caregiver burnout is typically affects people who they described as if they are truly burned out, they lose this ability to empathize with the ones that they care for, and even with others, other caregivers. Whereas compassion fatigue, individuals do not experience this loss of the ability to empathize, and they do continue to want to help and want to serve. It's also different is that caregiver burnout emerges over time, whereas maybe someone who has provided care for many years, they eventually lose that ability to empathize, whereas someone with compassion fatigue, this is typically more rapidly onset. So maybe someone is new to providing care for someone and they are experiencing lots of stress and trauma surrounding providing care for that person. So while we've talked a little bit about the differences, let's focus on the commonalities. While there are quite a few differences, this is the reason why they get confused, is that they present similarly in many cases. So some commonalities is that an individual could experience emotional exhaustion. They could have reduced sense of personal accomplishments or meaning in work, both of those which could also be misinterpreted as depression. So it's very important that you stay in tune to your needs, your feelings, and relay those to your medical professional. So in addition to emotional exhaustion, there's possibilities that one would also feel mental and physical exhaustion. So not only would you feel mentally tired, but your body feels tired as well. You might experience decreased interactions with others where you're isolating yourself. So maybe not wanting to go to church, not wanting to go to your neighborhood picnic, or maybe not wanting to go to your tennis match or shopping with a friend. And there's also this depersonalization, which really just means that there's this detachment within yourself regarding your mind or your body, where you're feeling like you're not necessarily in control as the outside looking in, where you may be quote unquote floating above yourself and watching what's happening to you, but maybe not necessarily in tune to your day to day, as your mind may seem to have a mind of its own. One thing I think is important to note is that there is such emphasis being placed upon the impact of compassion fatigue. And so important that even Mother Teresa understood compassion fatigue. She wrote in her plan to her superiors that for her nuns and her peers, that it was mandatory for them to take off a year from their caregiving duties every 4 to 5 years to allow them to heal from their effects of caregiving work. And that if you constantly give and give and give and are not able to care for yourself, it could have a detrimental effect on your own health. And if you don't care for yourself, you may in turn not be able to care for others. So we'll talk just a little bit about that as well. So let's talk more about how that may present for different individuals. Of course, signs and symptoms show differently for different people. So if we're going through some of these signs and symptoms and you may think to yourself, well, I have one or two of those, but not all of those, so I must not have compassion fatigue. I would encourage you that at the end of our presentation to take a step back and maybe answer our caregiver compassion fatigue self-assessment, to really try and dig down deep and to identify what is your risk for compassion fatigue. So one of those signs or symptoms may be excessive blaming throughout your life. Maybe something that you realize that you would not necessarily have blamed others for or had an emotional response to. You may have a differing response to now due to your compassion fatigue. Also, maybe bottling up emotions, trying to repress things so that they aren't having to deal with it at that time. Again, isolating from others is very common. So not wanting to go to church or purposefully making the decision to cancel on plans. Possibly having increased use of substances. So maybe if you find yourself wanting to drink more in the evenings to release some of those stressors throughout the day. Possibly other compulsive behaviors like overspending or overeating. Poor self-care. I think this is one of the more common ones. Others, we tend to give up the care that we need to provide for ourselves. So things like hygiene or our appearance, we may put to the wayside to be able to care for someone else's hygiene or their appearance. Another sign or symptom may be possible legal problems or indebtedness, especially if you find yourself having other compulsive behaviors like overspending or gambling. The recurrence of nightmares or flashbacks to a particular traumatic event that has led to your compassion fatigue. So, also chronic physical ailments. If you see yourself developing more health problems through your care journey, such as intestinal problems, reflux, anxiety, depression, or more recurrent colds or sicknesses. Apathy, which really means you're no longer finding that activities that once brought you pleasure are no longer bringing you that level of happiness. Difficulty concentrating, maybe if you're still able to work or provide home care, taking care of your yard or gardening or cooking outside of your caregiver abilities, you may no longer be able to concentrate on those from worrying or thinking about the person that you do provide care to. Maybe becoming mentally or physically tired, otherwise finding yourself preoccupied in thoughts, and even being in denial about some of these problems. So thinking through all of those potential signs and symptoms and applying to maybe your current situation, and then let's work through now some path to wellness, and that there are some 10 tips for family caregivers. This is provided through the Caregiver Action Alliance, which is a wonderful resource I'll share with you at the end of today's presentation as well. But preemptively planning maybe how you will experience and respond to these potential signs or symptoms. So this again will be provided to you at the end of the presentation today. We'll work through some of these examples together, but I would encourage you to take this aside and fill it out for yourself. So the very first one is to seek support from caregivers, other caregivers that are in your very same situation. So there's great strength in knowing that you're not alone. So let's think through what are some other caregivers that you can reach out to. Maybe if you're a part of a support group, or maybe if you have caregivers in your church, or maybe even if you have siblings that you share your caregiver duties to, reaching out to them to seek support, because there is power in numbers. And having that emotional outlet, maybe to discuss some of your concerns or your needs or your frustrations, can help you to emotionally process some of the things that are required of you as a caregiver. Number two is to take your own health, take care of your own health so that you can be strong enough to take care of your loved ones. So, listing some things that you really want to be cognizant of yourself so that you can take care of your health. So, maybe that's taking a day off of caregiving to go and do your own doctor's appointment so that you can be well cared for. Maybe it's something even more leisurely, like a day spa or golfing or a day shopping so that you can reinvigorate yourself to have that strong mental health. Number three is to accept offers of help and suggest specific people can help you do, which I think we find this so often, and that others do want to help. They may just not understand or know what to offer. So when those offers come through to you, if we could have thought about and contemplated prior to the request, if someone asks of me that what they could help with, what can I tell them? A lot of common things are maybe providing a meal or maybe providing some cleaning services to your house. So some others may be if you would like for a friend to sit with the one that you're caring for so that you can have some alone time or read a book. It's then also moving forward in this follow-up question to ask you to think through, who are you comfortable accepting help from? So maybe that's siblings or other family members, or maybe that's neighbors or even members of your church. So, number four is learning how to communicate effectively with doctors, which brings a whole nother level of stress into providing care, as the medical world can be quite difficult to navigate. I think we know this through many of our own experiences, not even necessarily in advocating for someone difficult. So, some things that you could do to improve your communication with doctors are possibly that encompasses making notes before you go so that you know what questions to ask your doctor. You could be so much more effective with your time thinking through what you would like to discuss when you're with them, and ensuring that you're not missing anything and having to call the office back later for a follow-up question. Also, making sure that you provide them with a list of their current medications. Providing the doctor with a list of current medications can help provide continuity of care, or maybe even bringing a third person with you so that they can help to hear what the doctor's orders are or the communications that have been received by them. Sometimes when we're in the doctor's office, I can only speak for myself, but I glaze over just a little and I get so worried that I'm not soaking in everything, and I'm worried that I need to tell them, all the signs and symptoms or the change in condition. And when they respond to me by giving me an instruction on what to do, it's just almost inevitable that I miss something. So having that third person there can really help you to fill in the blanks later. You can also discuss with your doctor what their comfort level is on you taking notes yourself and even recording the conversation. Question number five is that caregiving is hard work, so to take respite breaks often. So this is asking of you to make a plan about how are you going to take those breaks. So listing off, I will take a break from caregiving to do what? Maybe again, that's your own doctor's appointments or something more leisurely like care appointments. And then who will you contact, whether that's your friends and family or a supplemental agency to help to provide that care for your loved one so that you can have a break. Outside of your friends or family, I do think it's important to know that there are outside agencies that just provide short respite services so that if maybe you're not in a place or even a location, a state, that you have supplemental family or friends that can jump in and help. There are agencies that could support you. Number six is asking for you to watch out for the signs and symptoms of depression, and to educate you on what some of those signs and symptoms may be, and encouraging you to seek help when needed. So those signs and symptoms listed are symptoms such as persistent sadness or feeling empty, trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, and even on the opposite end of that is sleeping too much, having poor appetite or overeating, loss of pleasure and interest in activities once enjoyed, irritability, restlessness, maybe even some persistent physical symptoms that don't respond to treatment, like chronic pain or even digestive disorders like reflux, having difficulty concentrating or remembering or even making decisions, lots of fatigue or loss of energy, feeling guilty or hopeless or worthless, and even thoughts of death or suicide. So it's recommended that if you're having any of these 5 or more symptoms for a persistent amount of time, this recommends for more than 2 weeks to report to your doctor for further investigation and support. Number 7 is to be open to new technologies. So, some things that can help you make your life a little bit easier, some areas in which new technology might be helpful. So, just a couple things to help you brainstorm how you'll plan out some implementations are maybe the person that you provide care for requires blood pressure checks. If your manual blood pressure cuff and stethoscope are difficult for you, know that there are pieces of technology out there that could help to take that stress off of you. Maybe you need electronic blood pressure cuff, or maybe you have stress surrounding medication administration. Know that there are many different technologies that can help to support the administration of medication. So I would encourage you to identify what brings you stress and to investigate if there is some supplemental technology that can help to reduce the stress surrounding that task. So, the follow-up question here is that you will inquire about adaptive equipment in the following ways. Adaptive equipment are other things that could make life a little bit more easy for you. Adaptive equipment airs, grab bars to get in and out of the shower or tub, walkers, wheelchairs, maybe even different shoes that are more supportive of taking them on and off for safety, or the fit that are more orthopedic to reduce falls. Maybe it's adaptive equipment for eating. There are many things throughout the dining process that become more difficult, whether someone can't feed themselves, or maybe they just need some changes in the tools so that they can be encouraged to be more independent. Things like a plate bumper or two-handled cup, or even maybe a built-up handle on a piece of silverware can help to encourage independence. Number 8 is organizing medical information so it's up to date and easy to find. So there are so many ways that you can organize your medical information. I think it's best just to find what's easiest for you. So organizing could be by medication or by doctor or by specialty. It could also be surrounding about different particular piece of information. Number 9 is making sure that legal documents are in order. So the follow-up question here is that you will organize legal documents by, and it's asking you to think through how you would like to organize those legal documents. So that could be powers of attorney, medical powers of attorney, financial powers of attorney. If someone has a DNR, or maybe they have a living will, ensuring a way that you are aware of the organization of those documents could help to reduce stress later. And finally is giving yourself credit for doing the best that you can in one of the toughest jobs that there is. And I wholeheartedly believe that caregiving is one, if not the most difficult jobs that there is, both formal caregiving and informal caregiving. So taking a moment to jot down some of the things that you are doing well. So maybe that's doing well, ensuring that your loved one gets their medications when they need their medications, or that they're to all their doctor's appointments on time. whatever it may be, little smaller in between, focusing on the things that you're doing well can help you in those times when things get tough, when maybe some of the thoughts in your head are that more frustrating, and you feel disheartened, and maybe that you might not doing a good job. Remembering that yes, you're doing everything that you can for your loved one, and that they are super. So let's talk maybe a little bit more about some supplemental resources, because there are so many great things out there that can help you through your caregiving journey, whether you need something more involved like a book. There are books, just passive books with pages and chapters of many, many great tips on how to quote unquote survive caregiving, which that is another book. There are several listed here. One is The Conscious Caregiver, to Cruising Through Caregiving, or 3 Daily Listed here, which is a workbook of sorts, which is similar to what we were working through in those top 10 caregiver tips, is to provide you with information, and then applying it in a workbook. This particular workbook is tips on relaxation and stress reduction for caregivers. So if maybe a book, something that might take more time and an investment, is not necessarily something that you're able to give, but you're still interested in learning more and want to seek support, but you may not necessarily be able to give the time, is that there are so many pieces of information online at our fingertips. Some really wonderful resources would include the Caregiver Action Network. There's the Family Caregiver Alliance, which is the National Center on Caregiving. Both of those resources focus solely on caregiving, and they have many, many, many different outlets for education, whether that's through videos, downloadable PDFs for print and email, or whether that's through blogs. They have lots of resources at your fingertips there. The third is the National Volunteer Caregiving Network. And the last two are the National Institute on Aging and the National Council on Aging. I love to share with people the resource of the National Institute on Aging. The National Institute on Aging has many, many, many free publications that are really well written, great educational evidence-based pieces. If you access their website, they have a very big, clear link that says access free publications, and you have 2 options to get that piece of content. You can either download it directly to your computer as a PDF for print or saving, or you can ask that they send it to you. And they will do that absolutely free. They will not even charge you for shipping. So it's a really great public health initiative to ensure that individuals working with someone who may be moving through the aging process have all of the resources and tools that they might need. And then lastly, are 2 support groups. If you have never attended a support group, I would strongly encourage you to attend maybe one and see if it's something that you're interested in, assessing your own personal experiences and knowing that you're not alone, and that there are many other people out there that may be experiencing something similar to you. If you remember from our very first slide, there are over 53 million Americans who are providing informal care to a friend, a family, or a neighbor. So while the COVID climate has affected their ability to have in-person support groups, there are 2 great options that are being offered virtually that can be attended. So the very first one is the Alzheimer's Association support group. So again, that is virtual. It's more in line with individuals who are caring for those with memory loss, whereas the second option here is hosted by the Family Caregiver Alliance, and it's a general caregiver support group, not necessarily specific to those caring for individuals with memory loss. Okay. And both of those can be accessed online, and they are virtual again, which is also really helpful if you are at home and you don't have someone who can support you in covering for providing care, if you're not able to support and without having to leave the comfort of your home. So I want to leave you guys with a really impactful quote that I remind myself of often, because I just think that there's so much to be said for these words. So thinking through and allowing this to resonate with you is that to take your oxygen first, meaning that nourishing yourself before you take care of anyone else and keeping your body strong. Give your soul some strength to take a break, forgive yourself, forgive others, and forgive again, and to do those things first. And that the ultimate loving act, the ultimate selfless act, is to first love yourself enough so that you can care for yourself. And then think of it as an investment that will then allow you to love and support the individual who does need that support, the person who is sick. So those two quotes are from a really great book called Surviving Alzheimer's, which is from Paula Spencer Scott, but a really great resource as well. Then lastly, I want to leave you guys with a bit of homework. I will not grade it, I promise. It's not absolutely required, but I would encourage you to investigate it if it is of interest to you. I'll show it to you quite quickly. This is a compassion fatigue self-assessment. It is a 40-question assessment. Don't worry, it will take you much less time than you would anticipate for a quick 40-question assessment. It's prompting you to rate your response for 1, very true, 2, somewhat true, or 3, rarely true for each of the statements listed below. So for example, the very first statement is, when people get upset, I try to smooth things out. So you would rate yourself or 3 if that's rarely true. I took the assessment myself. It took me probably 4 to 5 minutes to complete in its entirety. So don't let the number of questions fully overwhelm you. It does go by quite quickly. This is from a book called Overextended and Undernourished, a self-care guide for people in helping roles. And so what you will do at the end of this assessment is you will tally up the number of responses which you attributed a 1 or very true for. In this particular assessment, it shows that if you have more than 15 of those items, it would suggest that it's time to take a close and careful look at your self-care and maybe follow up with your physician and to address maybe some concerns that you would like support in. So that is the entirety of the information I wanted to provide to you today surrounding caregiver fatigue. And I would like to open up the chat box for anyone who has questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kayla. That was great information. We do have some questions, starting with, what are some useful differences and similarities between parenting and compassion fatigue and caregiver burnout?
I think a lot of these things overlap a lot too. Even they overlap with depression. You'll see listed that there are some very strong similarities, if not the exact same signs and symptoms listed for compassion fatigue as depression. And there are even some overlaps between compassion fatigue and caregiver breakdown. I would say some of the differences in compassion fatigue and compassion and caregiver burnout is that one major difference that jumps out to me is that with caregiver burnout, the individual may no longer have the ability to empathize. They don't want to care, provide care, and they may have an emotional block or the inability to provide that empathy for the one that they are providing care for. Whereas with compassion fatigue, they really may want to provide care. They do still have that drive to care for the person, and they have that emotional connection with them. I would say the differences between parenting and having compassion fatigue is they jump out and they are quite similar. I can speak for that myself in that just last night I had an issue with my young daughter. She's 10 months old, and she was having some difficulty breathing, and I took her to the ER, and I'm like, oh man, this really is in line with compassion fatigue. Is that I feel like I can't think of anything else. I feel like I can't do anything else. My house is a wreck today. I'm glad you can't see too terribly much behind me. But I do, you're not burned out, because that was only a single instance that she had problems. I feel like I may be slightly traumatized by it, but I still have that empathy. So I don't have that caregiver burnout, but I may have a bit of compassion fatigue, and that I guess, process for some time. So you can be a parent with compassion fatigue, not necessarily just a formal caregiver. And if you think about it, absolutely, parenting is caregiving. So of course you could experience both.
Great. Glad to hear your daughter is okay
I
and
know.
things are getting back to normal at home. Um, should someone need additional resources beyond friends, family, those close relationships, what are some external, you mentioned agencies that they could reach out to that may be a paid resource?
So there are several things that you could reach out to. There are things that are more informal. So there are websites called like care.com, and people use that for both babysitting services for finding care for children, but they also use it for sitter services, maybe for someone older. There are different ways that you can kind of filter what you're looking for. If you want someone who's CPR certified, if you want someone who has formal caregiving experience, and you can choose if you want to interview that person, or if you can filter by their hourly rate. So it's really, I guess, more so a job board of sorts to make your resources available through something a little bit more informal. Outside of that, there are some more formal agencies that provide sitter services. If it's just something that you need maybe on a recurring basis, like twice a week, you would like for someone to support you by providing care for 3 or 4 hours. I did through many, many, many different companies. I could name a few off the top of my head that are more national. There's I just have them written down. Home Instead is one. Care to Continue is another. But I would bet that if you Googled sitter services or sitter agencies or caregiving in your area, there would be quite a few that would pop up. The allure to something like that is that these people are a little bit more vetted through a formal process by this agency. So these people likely have had job interviews through them. They've been background checked. They've likely been drug screened. And a great part about it is that if you were to go with something more informal and that person called out or they couldn't come, it would be very hard for you to then fill that spot if that was your only informal caregiver. Whereas if you're working through a company that's a little bit more formal, they will have lots of other options for you and can send you a substitute caregiver. And while that's not necessarily the most, because you want to provide a very structured environment for the one receiving care, if you're in a pinch and you have to do something, it's a really great option. I will tell you that there's obviously price difference for the informal versus the formal. Informal care providers are a little bit more economical, whereas if you're working through a very structured agency, you pay a little bit extra. It's probably to cover the background checks, the screenings. They do train them in very formal avenues, and they also provide, I guess, the comfort of having some backup if something happens with that caregiver. Outside of that, if you're looking for something more long-term, maybe you're going on a vacation for a week or 2 weeks. Many assisted livings in your area will provide respite services. And that's just a short-term stay in an assisted living where they would provide all care, very typical services that you would already receive through an assisted living, but you wouldn't be tied to the contractual obligations of a month-to-month pay. It would just be typically a week or 2 weeks.
Great. Thank you so much. A really great point there about retaining empathy versus losing empathy. I appreciate that. And thanks for the comments in the chat section too. Kayla, I'd like to thank you for the valuable information and resources, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'd also like to thank the team at St. Louis Magazine for facilitating this webinar. You can access this recording as well as the resources that Kayla referenced, all on St. Louis Magazine's website. Anthology Senior Living operates 3 communities in the St. Louis area: Clayton View, which is located in Richmond Heights, Town and Country, and Wildwood. If you have any questions about your local senior living communities at Anthology, please visit anthologyseniorliving.com. Thanks again for joining us today. We really hope that you have a safe and healthy holiday season.
Thank you, guys.